I didn't notice the pearls until the light caught them, an elegant gleam against a black dress that still smelled like store tags. A necklace my father gave my real mother 2 decades ago, now strung around the throat of the woman calling herself his widow. Before we conclude, Francine said, voice sugared to perfection, I need to address something important. 200 people held their breath. I sat in the 3rd row instead of the 1st, and humiliation burned through my grief like a match to dry paper. I had driven 3 hours at 7 a.m. from Millbrook, fingers locked around the steering wheel while the oldies station tried to comfort me with a song I couldn't bear to hear. When Stand By Me began, I silenced the radio and stared at the white line of the highway, remembering my parents dancing to that melody when love still meant permanence. My mother, Patricia, had died when I was 14, a slow, honest passing that taught me how to say goodbye. My father and I lived on frozen dinners and soft laughter, rebuilding something fragile and true, until Francine arrived in heels that marked the floor and a smile that never reached her eyes. Within months, she moved in with her son, Rowan, and the house changed temperature. Our home felt rented from a stranger. Now inside a church washed in morning light, Francine commanded the podium like it was a stage. She'd arranged the seating so that her sister Dolly and Rowan occupied the front row, while I hovered one pew behind, close enough to see the tremor in her hand as she dabbed at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. Harold left everything to his real family, she announced, letting the word real slice the air. Not to children from previous marriages. He left his legacy to those who truly stood by him every single day. I heard my Aunt Judith gasp. Uncle Glenn's knuckles whitened around his wife's hand. Behind Francine, Dolly nodded solemnly as if she had rehearsed the beat, while Rowan, 22, and certain of the world, smirked like he'd already inherited the son. The stores, the house, his investments. Francine continued each noun like a bell tolling. All of it. Panic skittered through my ribs. My father's smiling photo on the program blurred. I stood before I knew I would, and my voice came thin but steady. That's a lie. Francine's gaze pinned me, cool and delighted. I'm sorry, Bethany, did you say something? Please share. I could feel the congregation turning like a single body with 200 eyes. Dad would never do that. I said, heat flooding my face. You kept me away. You canceled our dinners. You told me he needed space. She sighed with theatrical sorrow. This is the drama Harold wanted to avoid. He asked for peace in his final years. A quiet, measured voice cut through the hush. Mrs. Delaney. Heads turned as Theodore Aldrich stepped from the back aisle, our family's lawyer for 30 years, the kind of man who wore a 3-piece suit to buy milk. He walked toward the altar leather briefcase in hand, footsteps echoing like a metronome for the truth. I'm afraid there's been a significant development regarding Harold's estate. Francine's smile faltered. What development? You witnessed the will last year. I did, he said, drawing near, and 3 days before Mr. Delaney's death, he came to my office alone to create a new will and revoke the prior one entirely. Francine's sweetness curdled. Impossible. Harold was with me that day. Aldrich did not blink. Actually, you were at a spa retreat with your sister. Mr. Delaney showed me the receipt and asked me to notarize a copy. A murmur rippled through the pews. Dolly flushed. Rowan sat forward, the smirk torn from his face. Aldrich set his briefcase on the front pew, clicked the clasps, and withdrew a tablet with the solemnity of an offering. He also left a video with explicit instructions to play it if anything happened to him within a year. Francine moved, then stilled the pearls at her throat, suddenly heavy. You will not, she began, but Aldrich had already turned the screen toward the church. My father's face filled the glass, gaunt and gray eyes sunken and fierce. In the silence, his voice arrived like a knock at a locked door. If you're watching this, she killed me. Gasps erupted through the church, like a single breath released too late. My knees went weak, and I clutched the pew in front of me to stay upright. On the screen, Dad looked smaller than I remembered, his hair thin, his once steady hands trembling against the desk where he sat. My name is Harold Delaney, he said quietly. Today is October 15th, and I'm recording this in my lawyer's office because I believe my life is in danger. If you're watching this, then I'm dead. And it wasn't from natural causes, no matter what the death certificate says. Francine's face drained of color. "Turn that off," she shouted, stepping forward, but Uncle Glenn blocked her path, his voice hard and steady for the first time all morning. "Let it play." The screen flickered as my father continued, his breathing labored. "My wife, Francine, has been poisoning me. I know how insane that sounds, but I have proof. 6 weeks ago, I started getting sick every morning after coffee only she made. When I stopped drinking it, I felt better. Then she began putting it in my food. Someone whispered a prayer. Another person sobbed. I stood frozen as my father described how he'd hidden cameras in the kitchen and bedroom, how he'd recorded her pouring white powder into his mug when she thought he wasn't watching. "It's thallium," he said, his voice breaking. "Rat poison. I've had it tested." I went to Detective Morrison with the evidence, but he needed more. "These are my medical reports confirming chronic poisoning." He lifted a stack of papers to the camera, his hands shaking the sound of shuffling pages loud enough to echo in the vaulted church. "I've been documenting everything because I know time is running out." Francine lunged again, eyes wild. He was delusional. He was sick and confused. She cried, but nobody moved to help her. Even Dolly looked terrified now, her lipstick trembling at the corners of her mouth. 3 days ago, Dad's voice said, "I changed my will. Everything goes to my daughter Bethany, my only real family." Francine isolated me from her, deleted her messages, blocked her number. She made me believe my own child didn't care. "Every cruel thing I said to you, Bethy, every time I pushed you away, it wasn't me. It was her standing behind me telling me what to say." My throat burned as the tears came. All those months I'd thought he'd chosen her over me. Every unanswered call, every canceled dinner had been orchestrated by the woman now standing in front of the altar, with shaking hands and pearls that no longer gleamed, but strangled. "Bethany," Dad said softly, "you were the best thing that ever happened to your mother and me. I'm so sorry." A single sob escaped me before I could stop it. "He's lying," Francine shrieked. "He's been poisoned by his own guilt, by his grief." But her words landed flat, powerless against the sight of the dying man on the screen. Dad leaned closer to the camera, eyes glassy but fierce. "If anything happens to me," he said, "check the basement freezer, behind the vegetables. I kept every single cup she tried to poison me with, 23 in total, all labeled with dates. I've preserved them as evidence." His lips quivered into something like peace. "By the time you see this, it'll be too late for me, but not for justice." And then looking directly into the lens, he whispered, "I love you, Bethany. Tell your mother I'll see her soon." The video ended with a click that sounded louder than thunder. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the front doors burst open and the sound of polished shoes against marble shattered the silence. Detective Morrison strode down the aisle, flanked by 3 officers, Mrs. Francine Delaney. He announced, his voice firm and clear, "You're under arrest for the murder of Harold Delaney." Francine's scream split the air. "This is a setup. It's fake. You can't arrest me at his funeral." The officers didn't flinch. One of them gently but firmly took her wrists, pulling them behind her back as silver cuffs caught the light. "We've had a warrant since yesterday," Morrison said calmly. "The coffee cups were found exactly where Harold said they'd be. Every single one tested positive for thallium." Her son Rowan stumbled from the front pew, his voice shaking. "Mom, tell them it's not true." But Francine only turned toward him, eyes blazing. "Everything I did was for you, Rowan. For us, we deserved that life." Her words cracked as the officers led her away. He stared at her like seeing a ghost. "You killed him," he whispered, stepping back. "You actually killed him." And as the doors closed behind her, the only sound left in the church was my father's name, echoing through every broken heart in the room. The air outside the church smelled like rain and lilies left too long in vases. People stood in small, silent clusters, whispering the same question in different tones of disbelief. How long had he known? How much had she planned? I didn't join them. I sat on the church steps, my father's funeral program crushed in my hand, my chest hollowed out by grief and relief colliding at once. For months, I had blamed myself for his distance, for not trying harder, for letting Francine build that wall between us. Now I realized he had been on the other side of it, dying and fighting to protect me at the same time. The reception that followed felt like walking through a movie where everyone had forgotten their lines. Francine's friends from the country club avoided my eyes, pretending to remember urgent appointments. Her sister Dolly sat rigid on the sofa, her foundation streaking under the heat of humiliation. Rowan had disappeared, though his abandoned champagne glass still sweated on the mantel beside a framed photo of my father, smiling beside Francine. A smile I now understood was survival, not joy. The house was both familiar and foreign. My mother's portrait was gone, replaced by a seascape that matched Francine's living room furniture. Even the scent of Dad's aftershave had been scrubbed away by vanilla candles. I stood near the fireplace where Francine had once announced her victory and watched as Detective Morrison finished speaking to Mr. Aldrich. When the detective turned toward me, his expression softened. "We'll keep you updated, Miss Delaney," he said. "Everything your father documented matches what we've found so far." He was thorough. I nodded, unable to speak. The phrase "he was thorough" sounded too small for what my father had done. He had solved his own murder. He had turned dying into evidence. A week later, I sat alone in the lawyer's office as Mr. Aldrich read the new will aloud. His voice was calm, deliberate, but the words still hit me like waves breaking one after another. The house and everything inside it, mine. The 3 hardware stores placed in an irrevocable trust under my name. The investments, life insurance, and accounts all left for me to manage. For a moment, I didn't feel victorious. I felt crushed by the weight of what justice costs. "He wanted you protected," Aldrich said quietly, sliding the final document across the desk. "He also left you a letter." The envelope was thick and cream-colored, sealed with the kind of care my father used when wrapping gifts at Christmas. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single page in his familiar handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means you finally know the truth. Don't let her take another second of your peace. Build something beautiful from what she tried to destroy." I cried until the ink blurred. The trial came fast. The evidence was too strong to delay. Francine sat at the defense table wearing a navy suit instead of black, her hair pulled tight like a noose. Rowan testified against her voice breaking as he described finding rat poison in her purse years ago after his real father's heart attack. I watched him cry on the stand, the guilt carving lines into his face that would never fade. When the jury foreman stood and said guilty, Francine didn't scream or faint. She just looked at me with eyes emptied of everything but hatred and said, "You'll end up alone just like him." But she was wrong. 6 months later, I stood in my father's old office at the main store, my office now watching Hank, his longest employee, train a new hire. The shelves gleamed, the registers hummed, and sunlight poured through the windows my father used to polish every morning before opening. Hank glanced up and smiled. "Your dad would be proud, Bethany. You've not only kept this place alive, you've made it better." Sometimes late at night, I still watch my father's recordings, not the evidence, but the ones he'd made just for me. He'd talk about my mother, about the day I was born, about how he once dropped a hammer on his foot, but kept building anyway. "That's life, Bethy," he'd say with a tired grin. "You just keep building." Spring arrived with quiet grace, soft rain brushing the windows of the Maple Street house, the same home Francine had tried to claim as hers, now restored to what it was always meant to be. My mother's portrait hung once again above the fireplace, her calm smile watching over the living room where laughter had finally returned. Aunt Judith brought casseroles every Sunday. Uncle Glenn grilled in the backyard, and my cousin's children ran through the same grass where I'd once played with my father, their voices carrying joy back into the walls that had known too much silence. At first, I didn't know what to do with the money. Justice, even when it's fair, can feel dirty when it comes wrapped in grief. The stores flourished under Hank's steady guidance, and I poured the profits into something my father would have loved. We called it the Harold and Patricia Delaney Foundation, a program to give free tools and training to young people learning trades, just as he had dreamed when he started his first hardware shop with little more than hope and stubbornness. "Knowledge is the one thing nobody can steal from you," he used to say. Now his words live beyond him. One afternoon while clearing out his desk, I found a small wooden box labeled in his handwriting for Bethany. Inside were the simplest things: a photograph of Mom holding me at the beach, a silver keychain engraved with my initials, and a folded note. "I built these stores for you to have choices," it read. "Don't ever let anyone tell you your kindness makes you weak. It's what makes you different." I pressed the note to my heart, wishing I could tell him that he was right, that kindness had survived even through the poison. Rowan came by once months after the sentencing. He stood awkwardly on the porch, thinner, humbled. "I wanted to apologize," he said, "for not seeing what she was, for believing her." I looked at him and saw a boy who had grown up trapped in her shadow, just as I had lived under her lies. "You testified," I said softly. "That took courage. My father would have thanked you for that." He nodded, eyes wet. "I'm trying to start over," he murmured. "For what it's worth, Harold was the best man I ever knew." When he left, I watched him walk down the driveway and disappear around the corner, carrying the weight of redemption on uncertain shoulders. Even now, sometimes I wake up before dawn expecting to hear the faint clink of my father's coffee mug from the kitchen. The house is quiet, but I don't feel alone anymore. His presence lingers in the smell of cedar, in the echo of his voice, through the foundation of the business, in every nail, every screw, every beam that still holds. When the anniversary of his death came, we gathered at the store parking lot under a banner that read, "Building Hope One Life at a Time." I told everyone about the man who never stopped believing in work, in family and forgiveness, even as his life was slipping away. My father taught me, I said, my voice steady, that real love doesn't isolate or control. It protects, even when it costs everything. The crowd fell silent, some smiling, some crying. In that moment, I knew his story hadn't ended with justice. It had continued in every hand that would build something honest in his name. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who believes in love stronger than loss, and subscribe to our channel for more true stories of justice, family, and the power of truth. Comment below if you've ever had someone protect you even when it cost them everything.